maybe for today, we might kind of stick with things about the head and, like such as virtual reality headsets. I came out with a message, a PSA style message before the holiday gift giving season, the dark side of wireless gifts. And, virtual reality headsets and the Fitbits and all this cool stuff that mass media doesn't help by glamorizing and normalizing it. And it's the latest thing. They don't tell us what Alexa is doing, not only the surveillance, but also, I mean, they can come in and kind of freak the kids out. I've heard stories about that. But like these virtual reality headsets, I believe I shared with you this article that I just noticed it yesterday, and I'll post a link to this below. But Verizon, here we have this little girl with a VR headset. Verizon wants 5G in 100 schools by 2021. What impact could the radiation have on our kids' health? I think that would be good to talk about. And also, I'm kind of being treated for a concussion. I was in a bad auto accident a couple years ago, but my eyes aren't tracking quite right. I have a few other issues that I can blame some things on, but this particular clinic they're giving a seminar on this, but she has prescribed a couple of months of this vision therapy for me to get my eyes tracking again.
Yeah.
And I thought, if it involves this, no way. I'm not strapping this on my head and frying my eyeballs. Like, that parts of our bodies that contain the most water are the most vulnerable, our
Yeah.
eyeballs and the testes, and, that they get zapped the most, much
Yeah.
like a potato in a microwave oven. But I thought maybe we could talk about that, about Bluetooth phones. And I was giving a presentation before a group of 100 top realtors, and one realtor said, well, you're talking about all these cell phones. I have a Bluetooth headphone. I was told that that's safer. I thought, oh my. I said, think about it. You're putting it inside your head, and proximity is everything. So we talked about that for a while. But the link with cancers, thyroid, breast, prostate, some women carry their phones in their bras. Prostate cancer, some men, boys carry them in their front pockets. That it can lead to infertility. I've heard you speak brilliantly about this, and it made me think of a title: are we causing our own extinction?
Oh,
So
that's an excellent title, and just practically also, as you said at the beginning, maybe in the future, the children of today will grow up and start asking the parents, why didn't you do something? And for instance, here in Sweden, and we could just leave the radiation issue for a few minutes and look upon the fact that since children spend so much time very close to cell phones, laptops, tablets, they become myopic, nearsighted, and it has reached such a level. So the Transport Authority here in Sweden, who is responsible for driving licenses, has remarked that very many children in the future will not be allowed even to try to get the driving license because they are too nearsighted. They wouldn't be able to use a car in a safe way. And oddly enough, we talked about tinnitus and hearing loss before. I've seen similar outcries here in Sweden regarding hearing. And these earphones that people use, they are actually pumping very high energy amounts straight into the hearing system, wearing it basically out. And of course, if you don't see and if you don't hear, you would be in enormous danger in the traffic. And in so very many other instances, just imagine a girl or a boy who grows up and wants to be an airline captain, and they are saying, no, we cannot have people who cannot see properly and not hear properly. And that goes for so very many occupations.
I can
And then,
relate
of
to
course,
that.
as you said, the studies that actually go back quite a number of years or actually decades, pointing to impacts, for instance, on sperm cell count, sperm cell quality, motility, morphology, and also other studies that I've looked on fertility and showing that there could be a transgenerational effect, meaning that our grandchildren somewhere in the future cannot any longer produce new generations because something we did actually before 1994. And then the question is, how should they be able to call back and tell us that, please, could you stop this exposure? And one of the sort of big lessons for me has been that regardless of how this ends, from a scientific point of view, you can draw one very firm conclusion that since mankind is based very much upon greed instead of need, and that we tend to take the day as it comes and look away from the wolf that is in the forest. But one day the wolf will appear, and then we need to tackle the issue. But we cannot just look away. And as you know, when we talk about adverse health effects of artificial electromagnetic fields, like from cell phones and Wi-Fi routers, there are tens of thousands of published papers in peer-review-based scientific journals, and still society is just looking away. And it could end with the classical quote from the European Union, namely, late lessons from early warnings. And I have extended myself that quote into too late lessons from early warnings. And what you can draw as a conclusion is that if we keep on behaving so recklessly as we do now, there is just a matter of time before we will either kill ourselves or the rest of life on this planet. And if it's not through electromagnetic fields, it may be through nanotechnology, gene-modified organisms, or something yet to be invented. And for me, it's, and you know, I'm old now, so in a sense, from a philosophical point of view, could lean back, but I just cannot. I'm constantly stressed and frustrated and also angry because I see that the persons that really should take responsibility, they don't do it. And furthermore, along those lines, as you know, there is not a single insurance or reinsurance company in the world which takes any form of liability for health effects of electromagnetic fields, all categories, and not for nanotechnology, gene-modified organisms, and so on. And they have actually listened very carefully to persons like yourself, to me as a scientist and others, and drawn their own precautionary principle conclusion, namely, we have to abandon ship before it's too late. And
Right,
they
like
did
Lloyd's of
more than
London.
20 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing that I've asked parents, that if they're concerned about this, they might want to check with their administrators to ask them if they indeed carry third-party indemnification. Because like, you know, like Lloyd's of London, and they've come out, they realize the connection, and they're not going to pay on claims related to electro hypersensitivity. And that should be a clue right there.
You know, I gave a lecture here in Sweden some years ago, and on each side of the highway, there were two schools. One was super modern, wireless school. The other one was a wired, old-fashioned school. And then I remember I asked the person that was in charge of the educational program in the municipality if there was any difference between the schools. And this was a public question at the Q&A session after my presentation, and he laughed and said, no, they are equally good, you know. And then he realized that, wow, what did I actually say now? And we could have wired everywhere, and he really looked very, very awkward, I must say, you know. And parents stood up, and they really craved that they should go wired instead. And then my attention was up, you know. So after a few days, I called the authorities, the teaching authorities in Sweden. And to make a long story short, they said that actually the best maturation of the pupils and the best learning results they got in schools that traditionally didn't use all these gadgets, like Montessori schools, Reggio Emilia, and so on. But this woman also said we are not allowed to publicly talk about this because we are going wireless in Sweden, and we need to support that from all corners. And so you see, I would call it some kind of dumbness rules. People do have the answers in front of them. And here in Europe, this very big organization called OECD made a very big investigation, and they came to the very same conclusion. The more gadgets, the less good results in school. The contradiction actually here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I'm really, really glad you brought that up. And, you know, and in addition to all this technology, we're taking away their social skills. And, you know, they're not talking to one another, their life skills. Who remembers a phone number anymore?
No, right.
It's so
and there are some very interesting studies from Norway, the neighboring country to Sweden, where they have studied the central nervous system imprint of muscular movements, for instance, when you form letters by hand, compared to pressing buttons, where a K and an H will be the same movement. Right. To make it by hand made a very much better and faster imprint. They learned faster and better. And all of this is on the table, but industry and finance and whatnot, they are pressing on still. And I think we need to ask ourselves, do we actually know what we're doing to ourselves and to our children, as well as to all life forms on this planet? And first I was tempted to say, no, we don't know it. But actually, when I look in my computer with all the literature databases, I would say, yes, we do very well know what we're doing, but we need to act and react now.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think a lot of, you know, the influence of the industry, of the telecom industry, with their deep pockets for their, they can do the lobbying and their incredible profits in the trillions. It kind of, you know, it gives them myopia that they put the profits over the people, and they don't have a whole lot of, I guess they've sold their soul, or I'm not sure. I don't need to be maybe speaking in that manner, but it kind of reflects the level of frustration. And then when you look everywhere and everyone's got their head down, I mean, they even have, I mean, digital dementia, as you know, and there's a condition with the neck that they're treating the youngsters, younger people especially, for the neck, that they've got that
you
head
see
down.
that a lot in Sweden. Yes, you do. A lot you see it, you know.
Yeah, so you know, it's really interesting, and I think I shared with you a little while ago, did a presentation last year, and Richard Lear, who is he's a dear friend, but he gave a great presentation. He's a environmental health researcher, and he created this chart, and we will show this in the video, and I've shared this with you. But he did this presentation about the connection of environmental connection with the stunning growth of disease since 1990. But it's just gone up, just staggering, like the percentage of all of this, you know, panic disorder up 263%, leukemia up 588%, more of a childhood cancer, and cataracts 480%, anxiety 104%. But I think it might be interesting to talk about that. I mean, can people really say that this is anecdotal? You know, I know Martin Pall has written about it. And
but they cannot. I mean, we can just pick out one thing you touched upon, namely leukemia. And already 2001, the World Health Organization cancer classified power frequent magnetic fields, which is a long name for ordinary household electricity, and its association to childhood leukemia. So it has been, again, you know, for decades on the table, and not very much seems to happen. There are a few countries, but not the type of countries that I thought would be number one. As I said before, I thought Sweden would really jump on that bandwagon, but instead you find, and I really lift my hat for countries like the Solomon Islands, Nigeria, and Uganda, and so on. But that's not the kind of countries you would think would be the spearhead into the
Oh, you
future.
think
But
of
they
them as
are.
more third world.
Yeah, exactly. But they are. I mean, they're so ahead of us, you know, in these aspects. So it's impressive. And you also mentioned the immune system. I remember I made a rather thick review paper regarding impacts on the immune system. And while doing it, I saw a very dramatic impact of man-made electromagnetic fields. It was so dramatic, so I had to go actually to a colleague across the street from the Karolinska Institute to the Karolinska Hospital. And she is one of the top experts in the world when it comes to the immune system. And I said, please, couldn't you read this manuscript before I submit it? I don't want to look foolish, you know, and people would point out that I've done something wrong. And she took it and read it for a few weeks. And then she came back and said, no, nothing is wrong. Actually, you have kind of downplayed a few details that could easily be brought more up into the light. And another thing, I'm a parent, she said, and I am shocked. So she had read it and really become afraid what she saw in the paper. And we sent it and it was immediately published.
Wonderful. That is so strong. And I have found too that once one truly gets it, if they stop long enough to open their minds and their hearts to think about, gosh, this is all new information. And, you know, parents, well, like you pointed out in one of your presentations, I thought it was wonderful that they're in Sweden. You said the parents will dress their children in bright clothing. So they'll, you know, show up in the dark, and they'll go to great measures to protect their children. Naturally, it's what parents do.
Of course.
And I keep thinking, if you really knew what was happening with this invisible force, how could you justify, you know, at the very least, let's take this out of the bedroom at night when we are regenerating our brain, turn off the Wi-Fi router at night, put it on a timer, you know, I mean, just there's so many ways that we can mitigate. I think it might be a little bit foolish to think that we could suggest people put down all of the wireless, especially those blessed phones.
Well, you come into a very interesting area also, which is kind of new to me since the last 5 years. You know, I go around a lot and give lectures, public lectures. And for around 5 years ago, I noticed that the audiences more and more were asking for solutions, I would call it, you know. What can they actually do? And I didn't have very much to say at the time, but since then, more and more commercial companies actually try to come up with, if not the solution, at least some kind of part-time solution. In Poland, here in Europe, for instance, there is a company called Modita, and they have a telephone called Pure, and it's a low SAR level, it's a low exposure level type of phone. And I don't say it will save you from any disease, but it will at least bring down the exposure a lot. And here in Sweden, we have a company called RP, which stands for Radiation Protection of Sweden, RP of Sweden, you can Google that. And they have these cases you put on your cell phone, and it brings down the exposure in the order of, depending on make and model, somewhere between 70 to 99% without impairing the battery time or the connectivity or anything like that. And again, maybe it will not save you, but at least it will bring down the exposure quite a lot. And I'm sure in the near future, and maybe someone from Huawei is listening right now, you know, and they will actually integrate all these things into one single product. And anyone doing it will become tomorrow's winner. And of course, you being an American, you want some young men and women in a garage in California to actually invent it right now.
Yes.
And I, as a Swede, want some Swedish men and women to do it because, if you remember the group ABBA, they have a
Yes.
song called The Winner Takes It All. And
Yes.
unfortunately, I must say that the interest from United States and Sweden is pretty meager, I would say. But there are other countries that are very much up and running and trying to learn from me and from others. And I'm sure they will come forward with new products. And such countries could be like Malaysia, Poland, I mentioned before, is a little bit here in Sweden, but not very much. But above all, in Norway, I would say that's probably the most common call I get, either from Norway or from a lawyer somewhere in the world. They are the two most common call types. And of course, if the Norwegians would construct and manufacture a new type of cell phone, maybe every cell phone tomorrow will be labeled Norwegian, like the airline company. So you never know. Any country that will do it will become richer than Japan ever was.
No
So
kidding.
there is a upside and a downside to every coin.
There you go. And I think if once you touch upon their hot button, which is speaking in the jurisdiction of commerce, the language of money, that can be a win-win. And perhaps between you there in Sweden and me here in the US, we can envelop the world.